Hey there everyone, I'm Dusk and I'm going to lead you through how I made my boyfriend's articulated wings for his Pit cosplay. So if you don't know anything about Pit, that's okay. Essentially he is an angel, so he's got white angel-y wings. So first step you have to do essentially, before you can do anything else, is you have to make that back brace, this part right here. Now, as you can see, it's kind of in the shape of an ice cream cone if it was more square than it was round. So in order to make this, because this is where everything connects to, it's probably the most pivotal part of the costume, what you are going to want to do is, right, so what I did to make my back brace, or plate, whatever you want to call it, is I used fiberglass cloth to do it. I wanted it to be hard, I wanted it to never move, and I needed to know it wasn't going to break under the strain. So I went and I got this fiberglass repair kit. It was about $20 at a local hardware store. It comes with the fiberglass cloth, the resin, the hardener, and then a little tray and stir. Kind of looks like that. This is the second one because I ended up messing it up the first time. So essentially what you want to do in order to make this back brace, or this back plate, is you need either a dress form or you need someone to help you so you can do this to yourself. Essentially what you are going to do, and I actually did it on Topher's back, that way it would mold perfectly to his spine and his shoulders for the ultimate support and the most comfort. But what you're going to want to do, if you're using a dress form or even a person, you're going to want some kind of probably an old t-shirt or something that you don't mind being cut up. You're going to place it on them, and then you are going to lay them on their stomach, or I would lay this on its stomach, and then I am going to duct tape or put masking tape on the area where I plan on making that ice cream cone-ish shape. For these, you're always going to want to go over, not under. It's okay to make it a little bit bigger, go over the shoulder blades a little bit more. You can always cut it down into the perfect shape later. You just want to make sure that the edges are as thick as the middle, and it's a lot easier to place it in the middle than it is to remember to put it on the edges. But you're going to want to cover the area that you are going to be covering in the fiberglass cloth first. Once you've done that, if you're using a model for it, or if someone's doing it to you, know that you're going to have to stay still probably, to be on the safe side, about 40 minutes, maybe a half hour, but I would always say go longer than shorter, that way you don't mess up the cast. So you're going to lay the strips of cloth down on the area and essentially paint over them with the resin and hardener mix. There are instructions in the box to tell you the percentage to use. The first time I did it, I accidentally put too much hardener in the very beginning, and half my mix, about 10 minutes through, suddenly started to turn into a giant rock. So make sure that you read it right. It's always good to work with smaller proportions of both first and then mix the bigger ones. That way you don't accidentally run out of time to work with it. Be careful, it also kind of smells. You're going to want to do it by an open window or outside. It's not the best of smells, but if you have a strong tolerance for that, that's great. You may want to wear one of those protective masks. I don't, because I'm a bad example. So for the first layer, you're just going to use as much as you can, get that first, shape. When it hardens all the way, you're going to cut the t-shirt off the body, that way it doesn't mess with the setting fiberglass. Once you've given it enough time to officially cure and it's good, then you get to the second step. So essentially these wings are held onto the base by this part right here. This part is PVC about this long, and there are two connectors that are at probably 45, 50 degree angles, no, 45 degree angles, and I put it on either side of the PVC, and I used Gorilla Glue, or epoxy, to glue the ends onto the PVC rod in the middle. That way I knew 100% it was never ever going to move. They were never going to start coming forward and bending. But so once you have that, you're ready to go ahead and attach that to the base. So you may want to try to glue it onto the base first, because as it is going to be that kind of U shape, depending on how you glue it onto the base, it may come out away from the body more, or it may go straight up. I wanted mine to come away from the body just a little bit, just at a little bit of a curve. So before I went and actually attached it to the base with fiberglass cloth, ensuring that it would never move, I glued it with the Gorilla epoxy first to make sure that, yes, this is the degree away from the body that I wanted it to be at. So once I had it glued where I wanted it, I then went over the entire thing with another layer of the fiberglass cloth and the resin. And you especially want to make sure to just lather this area, because this is the most important part. This is what is going to connect the wings, however heavy or big they are, to the back plate. And then, also provide more support to the rest of it. You want this to be on the longer end as far as the length down, because that is going to help give you stability, and your wings aren't going to be moving all back and forth. It helps hold it in place by following your spine. So once you add this, and here's something that I learned, because like I said a little bit ago, I did this twice. So the second time I had to do it, I just had to redo the part where I attached the PVC to the actual back brace, and it was because I didn't use enough hardener. So in order to ensure that I didn't make that mistake again, I used up the entire rest of the tiny bottle of hardener and just lathered it over this part. So this is the smoothest, hardest part of the entire thing, and I'm not worried about it breaking ever. So that was a good decision. I don't regret it. But so that's essentially how you make the fiberglass back brace. From there, before you add any of this stuff, the additional PVC, anything like that, once it hardens again and is completely cured, you're going to want to Sharpie on the shape of your back plate. You're going to want it to come out so that it covers your shoulder area a little bit, and then goes down your spine for probably 4 or 5 inches to be safe. Once you have that shape, you are going to want to cover it with something like a felt, something that will keep it from touching your skin. Fiberglass is a very uncomfortable, hard, itchy material, and it's not comfortable if you don't cover it in something. So I covered the inside and outside with a skin tone piece of felt. That way, when it is seen underneath his costume or on top of it, whichever, it blends in more than it would if it were, say, black or white. It blends in to his skin from a distance as best as it can. I didn't worry about covering this part as much, mainly because that's where my leverage is coming from with the strings, and I will go into that in a little bit. But so you're going to want to put the fleece on. Now, once the fleece or the felt is covering your piece of fiberglass, that is going to be your brace, you are going to want to put your straps on it so that you can actually wear it, whether you wear it across your shoulders or you want to any other way. I suggest that before you put on the outside piece of felt that's going to be facing away from you instead of cushioning your back from it, that you get whatever material you're going to use for the straps. In my case, I use like some kind of fake suede or something that isn't going to stretch. You can use elastic for this, but know that elastic is going to eventually stretch out someday. But so I took these, and before I even sewed them shut, I sewed across the bottom and the top with this giant strap that was eventually going to become the underside, and then I did it again up here for the overside. It is sewn to the felt, and the felt is hot glued onto the brace on the front and the underside, and then around the edges I gave it about 1/2 inch to 1 inch extra from the fiberglass, and I glued the front felt to the back felt for added support. That way I knew it wasn't going to start peeling apart. I suggest putting the straps onto the outside part of the brace. That way it is pulling towards you, as opposed to if you put it on the inside part, it wouldn't take a whole lot of pressure for the inside to pull away from the outside, and then you would be walking along and suddenly the wings just fall off because there's nothing really keeping them there. So that's pretty much it for how to make the back brace, plate, whatever itself. It sounds really difficult, but it's really easy, and you can do it for like $25, maybe $30, depending on what you choose to use for the straps and the felt. So that's it for the brace. So on to the fun part, the wings themselves. So these were not the most difficult, but they were definitely a trial and error for me. What you're going to need for the wings is you're going to need, I would suggest if you're about 5'4", 5'9", like in the 5 feet area, depending on how large you want them, to get about 8 feet of PVC pipe. I used it at 3/4 of an inch. I got 8 feet of it, and what you're going to do is you are going to essentially, and these are kind of bending right now, but you are going to decide how long you want this inner shoulder part to be, and then how long you want the outer wing to be once you cut your PVC in half. So this is the equivalent of a little less than 4 feet for this side, 4 feet for that side. And you're going to want to get a heat gun, or you can use your stove if you have it on hot enough, and you're going to hold the PVC once you've decided the length of it. I personally drew out the shape of the bones of the wings on a piece of scrap fabric with a Sharpie, so I could know that yes, I want it to be at this angle for the shoulder, and I want it to be at this angle when it is fully expanded. And you are going to take that PVC and you're going to heat it up to the point where it starts to become bendable. I would suggest wearing some kind of oven mitt. That is very important. It will get really hot, and I have burnt myself in a number of ways, but thankfully not when it came to bending the PVC. So once you bend the PVC into the shape you want, before you attach it to the back brace, first you need to create your leverage system. How are the wings going to open? So in my case, I wanted the wings to open when he moves his arms. So I had to create some kind of way that when he moves his hand, whether front, side, back, whatever, that would be the trigger for opening these wings. So what I did is I decided that, and I'm sorry it's kind of hidden by feathers, I do have pictures that I'll be adding in later, but so I about 5 inches, 6 inches down from the outside bigger part, I drilled a hole all the way through, and for the inner shoulder part, I drilled a hole about 1 inch down, and I put a giant bolt all the way through both of them. This is the hinge. This, you want there to be an extra 5 inches or so past the hinge on the outside wing, because this is going to create the leverage you need when you're opening and shutting them. But so you want to get a bolt. You're going to want to put some washers in between to make up any of that extra space. I used about 4 or 5 on each side. And you are going to want to cover the bolt with the Gorilla epoxy, just the bolt. Make sure you don't actually get it on, or the nuts on the end to make sure they don't move. Make sure before you do this that it is not too tight, that when you try to open them, it has difficulty opening and shutting. This wing is a lot harder to open than this wing, though not by much, and it's because I tightened the nut on the bolt just a little too tight, so it has to fight a little bit harder than the other to open and shut the wing. So once you have that, you have it so that it is movable, you're going to want to drill a tiny hole at the very top of this outer wing. It could be right on the end. But this is what you're going to feed your fishing wire through. So I have mine doubled up so that it has the additional strength. I got 30-pound fishing wire because I'm paranoid about things snapping and breaking, and it did not. So you're going to take that, and you're going to want to find the place where it goes straight down. That way it's working to your advantage. It doesn't have any problems. If I were to pull in the opposite direction, see how it's not really moving, but if I pull it straight up and down, it doesn't have hardly any difficulties. So once you find the part on the shoulder bone that you want it to go straight down, drill a hole in it, and you're going to feed the fishing wire through it and stick it out the bottom. So in order to attach this to the base, this is when you would drill your hole into the PVC that is holding the entire thing to the brace, so that before you actually glue the wings themselves into it, you can take that wire that you fed through here, stick it into this part, and pull it out. That way you already know, yes, it's functioning, here it is, let's go. And then you can go ahead and glue your wings on to the back brace. Make sure you pay attention to the angle that you glue everything together at. Like I said before, I wanted mine to kind of come away from the body rather than go straight up and down, and it ended up working great. Make sure your left side and your right side match. It'll look a bit funky if you don't. And so here's an example of what it looks like when I pull on them. Well, on the one. The left opens the right wing and the right opens the left wing. It's really hard to do this while it's on the dress form. I'm afraid it's going to fall over. But so that's how you make them so that they open and shut. Everything from there is essentially feathering your wings. Now, this is just a skeleton. You can't actually do anything with this yet, so you have to put some kind of material on there in the shape that you want the feathers to somewhat take. A little bit smaller, but not bigger, because the whole thing has to be covered by whatever you're using for feathers. I used interfacing from Joann Fabrics. A stiff felt works just as well. They have the same texture just about, the same weight, depending on the thickness you get for your interfacing. And I cut it out in a pointy oval kind of shape, and I made a front side and a back side. That way it would glue to the front end and the back end of the PVC, and then I could glue it to each other to kind of ensure that it was going to stay together. You do that for all 4 of the chunks you've got, and then you just feather them. I used craft foam because it was affordable and because they bend with heat. If they start getting bent out of shape, like some of these are, it's easy to just go in with a really high-powered blow dryer or the heat gun and just kind of bend it back where it's supposed to be. You're going to want to do more than one row. Keep in mind you're going to want to start with the very bottom row of the feathers and just keep layering on top, whether you're using real feathers or not. That way it gives it more of a natural look. You can even go in and cut in little chunks and actually do an actual feather design. We chose to do more of this ovally kind of not as realistic feather looking design for the wings because the character was more like this as opposed to a real bird with feathers. And so we did that for the inside and the outside. Try to make sure that you're covering the PVC all the way with the under fabric and the feathers. That way it looks natural. Make sure you leave room for that hole that the fishing line is going through so that it doesn't get covered by feathers and won't accidentally get wrapped around any of the feathers when you're pulling up and down on it. And then to finish it off, I got a feather boa and glued it along the top of my wings. And yeah, that is how I made our articulated wings. I had him put this, I held the harness to his back while he held on to the front parts of the straps, and then I brought the bottom part and pinned them to the tightness that we needed them to be without cutting off the circulation in his arm or his shoulder area, and without it being too tight that it would start to leave like a red rash. So once we decided how tight they needed to be, I pinned it, had him take it off, and then I sewed it on my sewing machine. I did that as the last step. For the future, I think I would try to do that before I add on all the feathers, but I wanted to know and make sure that it was going to be tight enough with the weight of everything else. And it's not impossible to go in and tighten them some more as need be. You know, it will kind of naturally stretch out a little bit as the conventions come and go and wearing it for hours at a time. So depending on how you make the back, they may not really have a choice when they're stationary to kind of brush up against one another. What I would suggest is when you're feathering, is when we put the feathers on them, we did it with the intention of this is what it looks like when it's fully open. But when bird wings are closed, all the feathers would be going in a downward way like the bottom is. So if you were to go and do that instead, it would eliminate this problem of the feathers crashing into each other and kind of curling. So yeah, that is my articulated wings kind of walkthrough on how I did them. I hope it helped. If you have any questions, feel free to comment below. I have a lot of the progress pictures on my Facebook as well at Dusky Dreamer. Yeah.